everyone. We just wanted to give you guys a quick content and trigger warning. This episode of Lovecraft Country Bumpkin discusses topics related to homophobia.
Welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, Tori,
Klara,
and LaTara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
On this week's episode, Hippolyta takes us on an unexpected journey across space and time through many worlds, while she lives out new histories on Earth and also encounters unfamiliar places and spaces across the universe. The journey ultimately leads her to a deeper understanding and acceptance of herself. Elsewhere, Tick learns that Montrose is gay and later travels to find his mother's one other living relative, inadvertently crossing paths with his aunt Hippolyta along the way.
All right. So I think right off the bat, we need to acknowledge that for once, this was not a horror show.
Yep.
Finally. No, I'm just kidding.
Unexpected, not unwelcome. But to me, this felt a lot more like a space opera than it felt like a horror thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
Tori, could you expand a little bit more on what a space opera as a genre is?
Yeah, so the quintessential example of a space opera is Star Wars, but it's just a science fiction usually set in space where people hopping around to different planets and checking out all the different like ecosystems, checking out all the native flora and fauna. Star Trek is also an example of a space opera. But yeah, I quite love those things. So I had a wonderful time watching Hippolyta do it.
It was so cool to kind of like one of my comments about kind of just the experience of watching this episode is that it seemed to go by a lot faster. Obviously like episodes take 60 minutes either way, in 60 minutes, 60 minutes, but this one was a little bit like just a little bit more, not because it was necessarily more enjoyable to watch, but just happened to like kind of flow and be a little bit more of an easier thing to watch. And the kind of like, deeply episodic nature of space operas, like as you're moving around from different places and situations to kind of flesh out kind of the bounds of space and time in the world of the TV show of Lovecraft Country. It was just like really, really fun, just to do all the bouncing about, to just be really, really fun and really enjoyable to watch.
I really love how you use the word episodic, like that the one of the reasons why, because I agree the episode for me felt like it moved a bit quicker, but I hadn't quite made the connection of like maybe one of the reasons it felt that way is because it was actually moving us from place to place, and even perhaps time periods, definitely worlds
at the very least.
At the very least, throughout the episode, right? It was like actually transporting us to other places along with Hippolyta, which I could see why it would feel quicker. What's up?
Yeah, Tori, what's up?
Come on, Tori.
I have a theory, you guys.
You have a theory?
I have a theory that they were all on Earth, actually. Because when she was locked in that white room, right? And she was like bouncing around trying to test the gravity. She was like, well, it's like really close, but it feels a little different. And then she was like, oh, but such and such theorized that there would be like differences in gravity and there's no other inhabitable worlds known. So my theory is that all of them actually take place on Earth, but because of this like many worlds theory, they may be different like dimensions or that they, at the very least are different times because Christina had previously said that the orrery where Hippolyta got the key from was the key to Hiram's time machine.
Yeah, Christina calls it a time machine.
Yeah. So my understanding of it was that she wasn't bouncing around so much in space as she was in time.
I am unsure. I think only because I feel like at some point Hippolyta, I feel like when she got to the part where she like went back to George and she said something like it's not a time machine, it's like the many worlds thing. But I will say I do not feel strongly either way. I feel like this might be the kind of thing where perhaps they reveal more later, perhaps they don't, and like whatever interpretation we have like is also okay.
Yeah, and I mean Christina doesn't know everything. Like Christina has gotten all of her knowledge, like as she acknowledged in this episode, like everything she knows about the order and its aims and magic, she got
from her
illicitly.
dad.
Like her dad didn't want her to have it. William gave it to her, or she dug it up by herself. So I think it's fair to question Christina as the absolute authority, and this episode made that abundantly clear in ways that it hasn't been clear up until this point, that she is also kind of groping her way through right now and trying to forge her own path.
For sure.
Or at least like that's like asking like to like do like a super like high concept, like high like metaphysics. Like what is time? What is space? And how do dimensions then like because I'm a literary person, how do these dimensions of time and space like intersect to create the conditions of experiential world? So like maybe it is a space machine as we classically know it, but for that to be a space machine, it kind of reconfigures the dimensions of time and space, or reconfigures how we think time and space work, to create the world we are experiencing.
I really like that, like the complicating of like what is time and space, because so basically we have two possibilities here, right? We have like this machine as a time machine, meaning that in theory the place stays the same but the time changes, versus this machine is like a space machine or like a mini worlds transporter, wherein perhaps time doesn't move but location moves. But if we throw away all those distinctions, and in terms of like time is when and place is where, what if time is also a where and place is also a when, in which case, quite frankly, the terms become almost interchangeable.
You can write coordinates for time too.
And like that was so, remember at the bottom of the screen, the bottom left, coordinates always popped up. I could never, because they weren't latitude and longitude, because it was three of them, it was three different coordinates, but it also like didn't read temporally to me either. But I could not say if it were time or space, right? Like it just but it did give us a location without necessarily telling us which kind it was. And it's like, well, what if it was both?
And it could be as well like three-dimensional space, because all of our latitude and longitude is two-dimensional. So this could be like, as opposed to square space, cube space, with the added dimensionality of depth. So who even knows?
Time.
It could have been time. Like if we aren't leaving this world, that would make sense, right? Because we could still be using the square longitude and latitude, but the added dimensionality of time.
With like that would be like a timeline put in with the latitude and longitude lines.
I'm just like trying to like remember like the deep recesses of my mind in which I have like stored all my understanding of like physics.
Trying to pick the lock back in there.
It's just like, like what is like a dimension? Like it's like a point in space is a point in space, and then two dimensions when you have is when you have a series of points, and then two dimension is when you have a plane, and then three dimension is like the cube, and then the fourth dimension I think a lot of people tend to think is fourth dimension is a different. I think people maybe tend to associate
like
it
a hypercube.
It's like a dimension of time, or like So like what is a dimension then, right? Or like kind of like like what popular conceptions of dimensions are, opposed to like scientific physics. Sorry, not scientific physics, but or like like the discipline of science of
like geometry or something.
Of geometry of what dimension is. I have a story is. My father is a physicist, and we were watching the Avengers movie like years and years and years ago, and the object is the tesseract. And so my father leans over to me. He goes, "That's not what a tesseract is." So he explains to me that like you have a point, and then you eventually have a square, and then you have a cube, and then the fourth one is that's a tesseract. It's when you keep like expanding it. That's what a tesseract is. And I was like, "Okay, Dad, I'm just trying to watch this movie."
Please stop, Dad. Yes, please stop.
Yeah, I think that like from what we've been talking about, there seems to be two options. Either we have the dimensionality of like longitude, latitude, time, or longitude, latitude plus like the depth, the dimensionality. So either it's spatial and they're moving through different places in the universe, or it's temporal and they're changing location on Earth, which is basically means we're back to where our original debate ended. So, so basically, all the unlocking our physics brain was for nothing. So,
but it was interesting along the way.
But we have
good to flex that very withered muscle of science. So,
oh my
like I feel myself like back in 7th grade, like sitting in the chair, or like learning about trigonometry for the first time.
It's not a good memory.
Yeah. Whereas Hippolyta is a true like master of like all like coordination, like all geometric coordinations, and she's just like whipping these things out, talking to herself, and they're like appearing before her like magically, and I'm just like, okay,
yes,
I got it.
Yes. So it was amazing. I think like it's like I don't know, like I knew that Hippolyta was brilliant, but somehow like that moment where like she's like muttering to herself and like spewing equations and like fiddling with things and like and I just was like, girl, like I knew that you were like bad AF, but clearly I underestimated like how bad AF you are, because I'm just like I imagine how much she had to think through so much panic. Right? Like that's what like impressed me, because I'm like, I feel like in that situation, like literally my understanding of reality has completely folded, and I have to push past that enough to remember like what quantum physics, like I don't even know, right? Like what she was talking about, and she did it. And it was I was just like, ma'am, I like, you are incredible. And which is, I think, one of the reasons why this episode was so wonderful to watch, to like watch all the ways in which she was incredible unfold.
Yeah. And for her to like rely on the things, like, and to have like faith in herself, to like that she knows what she knows, that she has like, I don't want to say like an unwavering conviction that she knows what she knows, but that maybe I do want to say that. I don't know why I wouldn't want to say that, but that she has something within herself that she can rely on, that gets her through the trauma of losing her husband, or the traumas of like racial violence in Jim Crow era America, or Jim Crow era Chicago. And these are things about herself that are unwavering and carry her with her through all her different like iterations of her life, and iterations of Hippolyta in this episode, throw out far into the potentially far into the deep future, and through all the different places of like on Earth history, that these are things that like that make who she is, and she can rely on them.
Yeah, that was really well said, Klara.
Thank you, LaTara.
I like that. Yeah.
I think this is a good time for us to start off our Bummy Awards. So for any listener who happens to be new, the Bummy Awards are just our way of honoring the most standout things from every week. And I think for our first award, who won the episode, it's obvious who won the episode, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's Hippolyta. So, but luckily, thanks to the structure of this week, we can all pick a different Hippolyta. Which I think would be a really fun twist on an old classic. So, who has a favorite Hippolyta that they'd like to throw out there?
I can start, because I think my favorite Hippolyta, I think, also may tie a little bit into some of the themes of like the show's structure that we like already kind of touched on. So my favorite Hippolyta was Hippolyta the Discoverer. So, and I'm thinking of her as that part of her journey after she has gone back to George, and sort of had this like coming around full circle of like, these are all the things I sacrificed to be the Hippolyta that you knew, and I don't want to sacrifice her anymore. And then she goes like to these new places, spaces, times, whatever. And she's like studying cool things. Like it looks like she's like underwater semi. I mean, I don't know if it's water, but like, whatever. I'm going to call it water because that's the best approximation we have for it, I think. But she's like studying this like organism underwater, and then like they get to like that planet with like the little short aliens, and she has on like the cool skirt and like the blue hair. They were so cute. And I thought it was amazing. I don't know why I love this so much. And she just took George with her. She was like, you know what, you made me mad, but I love you, so you coming with me while I go explore all this stuff. Like he's just like, like the best sidekick she could ask for. Like while she goes to do all these things that she wants to do, and while she is as big as she wants to be. And there was something about that scene, and I'm thinking in particular, and I know we haven't talked a lot yet, but like thinking about the structure of this show, playing on like the idea of the space opera, and I'm thinking of the term Afrofuturism. And even though there's like multiple kinds of sort of sci-fi elements happening in this episode, but Afrofuturism, for those who would want like a little bit of background, I'm not obviously not an expert, but I've done a little bit of reading in the field last year. And for one thing, the term Afrofuturism is a little bit fraught. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm going to run with it just because, again, it's, I think, a recognizable term so that at least people can Google things about it after if they're curious. But the idea behind Afrofuturism is the question of imagining what futures are possible if in those futures the systems and structures that exist in our present no longer exist. And in the act of imagining, what possibilities do we open up for actions we could take in our present? So it's a complicating of both possibilities in the future and also possibilities in the present, in like a really interesting way. I think is reflexive. But just thinking about the versions of Hippolyta which were possible in this episode and were not possible when she was George's wife on the south side of Chicago, and had not had these experiences yet of being, and in her words, of being as big as she wanted to be. And I think that same theory, or the question of possibility, comes up in a lot of ways throughout this episode. But that scene in particular helps solidify it for me, thinking of what Hippolyta the Discoverer could be and is.
I agree. It was, I mean, just visually so stunning. Like that was definitely the most peaceful of all of her lives.
A lot of blue tinged scenes,
exactly.
if I remember correctly.
And it was clearly like inspired by Dee's comic. Yeah, his Orithia. I don't know how to pronounce it. Orithia, blue.
I'm gonna go with that. Yep.
Yeah. It was just so cool because, like you said, she took George, and it felt like Dee was there because the world that she was in, which seemed like a reflection of the comic. It was just like not a moment of Hippolyta being herself, but also being herself with the people she loves and like chose to surround herself with. It just felt like she had arrived. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, and that she like arrived with her daughter Dee, like that she like helped. That one of the ways that she sees herself being big is through the imagination of her daughter, and then explores the world in all its bigness and all its fullness as the discoverer of Orithia, Blue, and then linking her daughter to herself in this way. I think was just really, really sweet, you know, and really like just like an act of like, you know, like as cheesy as it may sound, like pure unadulterated love.
And joy too.
My favorite Hippolyta, is it favorite Hippolyta? The Hippolyta that stood out to me. The Hippolyta who won for this episode, whatever those different valences of meaning are, is the Hippolyta right before she decides to go back to Dee, and it's like after she's become her discoverer herself, and she is floating in time space, the soup that is time space, and talking to the I think one of the clearest manifestations of like at least the aesthetics of Afrofuturism in the show, with the very large alien woman. I don't know, I don't know. We don't know what to
very unclear.
Yeah, the very large.
Her fro was magnificent. That's
person
the
with the beautiful fro.
That's the most I had for you.
It was just like a stunning shape, right?
The shape was perfection.
I know, it was like so beautiful. And she had like, and there is the larger, like this person, like at this white room, and she has her fro in a specific shape, and then when she's like floating in time space, it's a different shape too. But it's just like so like curated, like curated sound to go, but it's like such a beautiful like careful placing of like the aesthetics of like trying to like frame her hair in this way. So Hippolyta is like floating in space-time soup, dimension soup, after she's become a discoverer, and she has successfully named herself, and she's just existing, and she's just being, and she's existing and being after becoming. I've been reading too much Hegel. talking to this figure, and then still deciding that she wants to go back to D, and back to to Earth as she knew it, even after she had successfully named herself.
Yeah, I had a similar moment too. The Hippolyta I chose was the Hippolyta who went back to George. And I think that it was like a similar feeling for me that George verbalized, like even after you had all these adventures and became so powerful, you still named yourself my wife, he says. And I thought that was like such a beautiful thing. And I think it goes with LaTara's moment too. Like the moments we loved best were Hippolyta, like, because she has this conversation with George where she talks about how being his wife and being Dee's mom diminished her in some ways. Even though when she's talking to Josephine Baker and she says, like, I thought that I was happy. I thought I had everything I wanted until I realized that I was just fitting in this mold that white society made for me. So it felt like this was her reclaiming these valuable relationships in her life and like reclaiming her status as mother and wife on her terms instead, instead of fitting into that like white society mold. So I just thought it was so cool because this moment that she went back to is like the first moment of the show. And if you've been with us since the beginning, you know that we took a moment in our very first episode to fangirl about how beautiful it was to see this like sexy, like warm and comfortable moments between an older Black couple. And then she took this moment that we love so much in the beginning and she like made it even better because not just a moment of like physical intimacy, but so much like emotional vulnerability.
She like complicates the initial perfection that we felt, and complicates it a little by talking about how George participated and helped, the limiting of herself. So she complicates that first TV moment, and then leaves room for it to be better, be better for Hippolyta. I just love that like Hippolyta goes back to this moment and she tells him everything, and maybe if we take the terms of like the world at that is moment, there's a possibility that George would be like, what are you talking about? You had a weird dream, but he believes her, right? So like in the relationship, he takes her seriously. Everything.
No question. And like even like going back to the question of like possibilities, like and sort of integral to Afrofuturism, that like it's like in the original version of this world, right? Like what would have been possible for Hippolyta to discuss with her husband. And this was not even this was not a possibility. And that in returning to that moment and in complicating the perfection, and I love that you use that terminology, Klara, in terms of complicating perfection, because it was even better in the imperfection of it, in the like, I need to acknowledge that something hurt me, and I need to acknowledge that like I wasn't being fully myself prior to this moment, and that the having of that conversation, which wasn't initially possible and now is, because now Hippolyta has the knowledge and the experiences that help her have that conversation. It's like it opens up an entirely new set of possibilities, one wherein she doesn't have to be, George's wife and Dee's mom and like not anything else. She can in fact be a discoverer and still have her husband with her because she loves him, and still go back home to her daughter because she loves her. And it's like, and I think that that's one of the most beautiful things about this episode to me, was just the wealth of possibility and like ability for there to be ands as opposed to Wars, if that makes sense.
Additive. It's additive possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I feel like I have to say that, you know, obviously with Afrofuturism, the idea is like both that there's like new possibilities for Black people, which do not exist in like our current iteration of reality, but that in order for those possibilities to exist, the entire world of possibilities has to change. So it's like it's another like both and, right? It's like there are new possibilities for Black people, but it's like, but in order for those possibilities to exist, the entire order by which our world is structured also has to change. Therefore, all possibilities become different or new or more.
Well, now that we have showered Hippolyta with some well-deserved praises, let's move on to our next Bummy Award, which is our Standout Scene. Does anyone have a standout scene that comes to mind?
So like for our standout scene, like I kind of we talked a lot about mine already. My standout scene is the one wherein Hippolyta confronts George about having diminished herself and also his contribution to that act of diminishing. And one of the reasons I loved it, which I don't think I've said explicitly yet, but I think this honestly made me love George more because in that moment, like not like to connect back to what Clara said earlier, right? Like he believed her in terms of like, oh, I went to all these other worlds. But for her to say to him, like, I feel that as my partner, you saw me make myself smaller and you helped. And he didn't try to avoid that, right? He didn't say, oh, that's not my fault. Like that was a choice that you made, which to be honest, I think a lot of people would. A lot of people I think would be like, well, I didn't ask you for that. Like that's your fault for making that choice. And he didn't try to dodge responsibility. He said, I saw that. I saw what you were doing. And he didn't just say, you know, I allowed it to happen. Well, he said that and then he went back and fixed it and said, I helped you do that. Right? I helped you make yourself smaller because I knew it would make me more comfortable. And I'm sorry. And now I see what it cost to ask you to make that sacrifice. Just because I just generally think that's rare. I think a lot of people would not acknowledge their own implicit demands of their partner, particularly when those implicit demands hurt their partner. I think a lot of people would rather shirk the responsibility. And so for him to not gaslight her in that moment or not dodge it in that moment, to just be like, you're right, I saw what was happening. And not only did I let it happen, I helped it happen. And I'm sorry. Like I thought that just honestly made me love him so much more as a character.
What a champ.
A genuine apology, not a I'm sorry I made you feel kind of apology.
It's I'm sorry I did this thing that I know hurt you deeply.
I don't know if I know anyone that would be able to confront such a difficult revelation,
existential revelation.
Because that's hard, right? To realize that like someone you loved, who you genuinely thought you've been loving well, like you haven't in some way. Maybe it's like only one way, but it's still a way. That's not a hard thing to hear.
We stan Uncle George in this house.
Stan.
We really do. Yes. For my standout scene, I kind of wanted to lavish some more praises on Hippolyta.
Always, all the praises.
She deserves it. I really loved actually the scene where she kind of like got kidnapped. Like it had the like alien abduction vibes. You know, she wakes up and she's all naked and she has that like weird jumpsuit, and then the gorgeous Afro lady comes in, and just like watching her, like initially like banging on the door trying to get out, and then she switches to, you know, big brain time. I was just sitting there thinking no other character on this show would be doing this. Like they would all be stuck banging on the door.
Definitely.
And Hippolyta is here figuring stuff out.
There's a lot of door bangers in this show.
Which like get stuff done. And we got some smart door bangers. Like Tick figured out that cipher. Like we got some smart door bangers.
We do.
But they're door bangers, and Hippolyta's like,
I'm going to open this door. Yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah.
I loved the space opera vibes. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of that kind of genre. So it just this scene hit a lot of buttons for me. So
yeah, I love your point about it being kind of like alien abduction-y vibes. So I think it's 100% true. Like, I think like maybe that's potentially the closest that we get to like a horror, or like a horror trope or like a traditional horror genre is like alien abduction. Yeah, and we have those vibes. We have like I haven't seen Space Odyssey, so I shouldn't make this reference. Like Space Odyssey vibe, where it's like a blank white room and you're on a table and there's like this cute little jumpsuit that she can wear, but kind of like the profound like anxiety-inducing like alienation and isolation of this scene is mimicked all by the fact that it's like white walls and kind of like that kind of like vacuous anxiety.
Yeah.
It's a cool scene.
It's super cool.
Yeah, it's also just like hard for me to follow because I am not big brain energy like Hippolyta is. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I just like in that moment I felt like, wow, this character knows better than me. Like, which is, you know, usually I have opinions about what a character should be doing in any given moment, but this time I was like, Hippolyta, take the wheel. Like,
yep. I trust you to do whatever you have to do to get.
That's rare for me.
Yeah.
I like that, Tori. My standout scene was when she first the second time she transports at time and space, I guess, and goes back to go dance on stage with Josephine Baker. First of all, that's just cool, right? Like, it's just like fun to watch on TV. I also think it's like, and again, like tapping into like my visual like weird thing about the coolest costumes. I love the costumes of the burlesque show. I kind of loved the pageantry of the burlesque show, and kind of like the humor of like watching Hippolyta relive our worst fears of being on stage and not knowing all the moves. But her still like adapting and like being excited by it and having fun and like getting to see Josephine Baker, who is a star in, you know, more ways than one, and her like watch with joy, like seeing the historical Josephine Baker on stage with her. I love the scene for a lot of reasons. I think it's like visually stunning, really cool to watch, just fun TV. I have like a historical like crush on Josephine Baker. I think she's one of the coolest women ever, one of the coolest people ever, and kind of her role in the French Resistance at the beginning of World War II, and just her biography and her life, I think, to be fantastic, and her perpetual like fight for freedom and the freedom of her others, I think, is just to be like, is astounding. And so it was really fun for me for this to kind of, just personally because of the things of the people that I find interesting, to have like Hippolyta start to form the terms of how she's thinking about that her the limits that have been imposed on her, and to her to begin to figure out how she feels about, or to articulate how she felt about being the demands to be small in Jim Crow America, in the world, in her life, and for her to imagine and demand that her lives and her durations of her lives be different.
Oh yeah, and hearing you talk, I just remembered a detail which I forgot about, like the scene prior to where she was in like the big wide room and like the alien abduction scene, but that this like incredibly tall, like beautifully afroed, like maybe alien being, like kept telling Hippolyta, "You are not in a prison.
Yeah,
right? Name yourself. Who do you want to be? Like, you are not in a prison." And I don't know what it is. Like, maybe it's just like the happy, like Black girl who lives inside of me. But having an incredible Black woman tell me I'm not in a prison, and I can name myself and simply be who I want to be, I'm just like, this is what the future should look like. This is what it should be. That there's this incredible being telling me that what I perceive as walls are not walls, and what I think is a prison is not a prison, and all I have to do is be.
Name yourself. Be. Yeah.
And that's beautiful and incredible. And for some reason that didn't click till just now. You're talking about like Josephine Baker, and like, because she did a similar thing in terms of like
She left the United States and went to go live in Paris, which has its own racial problems in the 1920s. It's not a utopia like how some people want to frame it as. But she made decisions, she made choices, and she left the world that is the United States and went to go live and build a life for her in Paris that was by any means not possible.
Not possible here. Yeah.
Not in the United States. Or I can't quite remember where in the United States she's originally from. But not possible. In her hometown, in her beginnings.
I can imagine her telling someone to name themselves and to do what it is that they, like thinking about imaginative possibilities. I just imagine this whole other conversation with Josephine Baker, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We love it. I love the just number of like strong Black women you can look up to in this episode.
Oh yeah,
incredible.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Unparalleled on television.
Oh my God. Y'all, I was so happy. Like little Black LaTara from the South Side, was in heaven this whole episode.
It was well fed today.
She was, yes, perfect description. I felt well fed at the end of this episode. Yay. Which doesn't often happen, truthfully. So this was a great feeling for me, like in terms of my affective reaction.
Yeah,
it was good.
Yay! I'm sure that the writers would be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, should we get to our cross country award?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the cross country award is the recognition we give every week to the theme from Lovecraft country, which is most relevant in our country. So for me, just to go back to this scene we can't seem to get away from in this episode, was the weirdness, the inevitability perhaps of hurting people that you love and hurting them with your love. Because, George definitely thought that he was keeping Hippolyta safe. He definitely acted the way he did to protect her, because it is dangerous for a Black woman to be driving on the road by herself in the 1950s. Like, there's absolutely no question of that. But, then he also has that moment of recognition, like, oh, but I fell in love with your curiosity. I fell in love with, that big brain energy that you haven't been able to use because of the life I built for us. It was, I don't have a nice way to wrap that up. I mean, it's just, maybe the nice way to wrap that up is for us all to be Uncle George and just be willing to accept that the way that we give love is not necessarily the way that people need to receive it from us. And the image that we've made of the people we love may not be the reality of the people that we love. And we have to, if we truly are with them, then we need to accept that we may have envisioned them incorrectly and accept the image that's more real.
To love someone is to love them in the fullness of who they are, even if who they are is quite different from who we imagine them to be.
Even if who they are is 4 or 5 different women in the course of this one episode.
Yeah. I think my cross country award is a little bit similar. Perhaps the same concept, but from the perspective of Hippolyta, the idea of having to make oneself smaller or other in order to fit expectations, whether those expectations are your families or societies, whether they're tied to your gender, your race, your citizenship, but regardless, that all of these identifiers also come with expectations that again limit those possibilities, and that the process of living within other people's boxes is painful, and it's a loss of who would you be if those boxes did not exist, I think is kind of the question I came back to in this episode. And I think it's one that I think a lot of women struggle with in our real world. I think a lot of Black people struggle with. and of course, outside of both of those identifiers, but being both a woman and Black, and I think about my particular context, it resonated deeply with me. The thought of like who am I if I decide to just be, if I were to name myself, what would that look like? What would life be like? So
if we didn't have these markers to identify ourselves, what would we identify ourselves as then?
Yeah. Or even just like even if we have like whatever markers we have, but if they didn't carry the limitations that they currently carry.
That's interesting.
Right. Like I would never change being Black and a woman, but I do wonder what would my life look like if all of the assumptions, pre-existing sort of expectations of what it is to be Black and to be a woman and to be American, were not there. And I don't know what the answer to that. I don't even know what that would look like. But I question, not my labels, I guess. I don't mind those. I love those. But what are the assumptions that they carry, both for me and for other people? And what would happen if they were gone? Those assumptions were gone, I suppose. So.
Let's find out. The Afro Goddess says we can.
Bro, and I think I trust her. I trust her more than I trust myself right now.
My cross-country award pertains to the one of the earlier scenes in the episode where Montrose and Sammy are together in Montrose's apartment, and coupled with the subsequent scene where Atticus finds out about his father's relationship with other men, and him asking his father, did his mother know? And then Montrose goes, yes. That scene is a lot in a very, very short amount of time. This is kind of temporally in the time of the show, right after the two of them have gone to that drag show, and in the red room, and kind of the moment of healing that LaTara referred to it as in another episode of our podcast. And so they're in the apartment, and there's the possibility, to pick back on our podcast episodes theme, of like something close to domestic happiness for Sammy and Montrose. Like Sammy makes him breakfast in the morning and there's like eggs, and he had gone to the grocery store to pick up fresh eggs and fresh bacon. And Montrose reacts negatively, and he starts to lash out at Sammy, and then Sammy's like, no, and I won't let you gaslight me into feeling like that I'm like that, into thinking that you're being a jerk. And so the kind of cross-country award that I'm thinking about is kind of the intersections of Blackness and queerness and sexuality and gender as they are manifested in the immediate moment, historical moment of the 1950s, and how this has heavy pertinence for our contemporary moment as well. Thinking about white queer spaces being profoundly racist, and many times being profoundly racist, and the tensions, or kind of the tension that exists in the intersection between sexuality and race, and the different ways that tension manifests, and how that limits Montrose, or how that creates profound tension for Montrose's interior life and his exterior relationships.
Yeah, I think this like goes back to the concept of boxes we were just talking about, right? Like, in some ways, I think for Montrose, certainly in the 50s, and in some ways today, it's thought that the boxes of queerness and Black masculinity like cannot overlap in a way that is really destructive to Black men who are queer, who exist. The boxes do overlap, but the like perception that they can't can be really damaging. As we are seeing with Montrose, dive bombing all of his relationships right now.
Yeah. I think like one of the like in thinking about like Blackness, masculinity, queerness, and thinking like after that scene when Tick rejects his father and runs away, and I think I did like appreciate that they gave us a little bit more of what was happening in Tick's head in that moment, right? Particularly like to realize that for Tick, it was, I won't necessarily say that he didn't care about his father being gay or having relationships with men, but that wasn't all. It was also, you know, you beat me because you said that like you didn't want me to be soft. And so in that there's kind of
how he had like curated his son's sexuality or his gender expression.
Or even just like the assumption that like that if a man I'll go with a Black man since they're both Black men. If a Black man is emotional, then he could also be considered homosexual. So like that slippage of like of gender performativity in a way of like what I outwardly show in terms of emotional reaction is going to equate to what people think and how they what people think about my masculinity. And that in beating him, his dad is like, you know, I'm doing this to like, you know, keep you from, basically so people don't assume that you're soft. But it was really for himself, like, or at least that was the conclusion that Chick came up with. Like, you know, he beat me, he abused me, to rectify his own like shame about being gay. And I don't know. I don't have a conclusion, I guess, but that in that moment, I guess I saw a lot of the things converge at once regarding masculinity, Blackness, queerness.
I hope we get to see more of that, because clearly this conversation's not over. So it's hard to see the one that we want to see as our hero. I mean, we saw this in the last episode too. It's hard to be disappointed in our hero. But it also makes space for conversations that need to be had, I think. So I'm looking forward to that conversation when they get around to it. So
yeah.
Well, I think we have talked a lot about it, but I think we just need to take a second to explicitly acknowledge like the power of names, and how the naming in this episode ties back to other names that we've been discussing and names that are going to become relevant in the future, right? Because right now we're on a quest for the book of names.
For the book of names!
There's a lot of names!
Adam does naming in the book of Genesis. That's all I know about the Bible, but that's what he does.
Oh, and the name of the episode too, I am, and then just stops. Like, this is also a biblical allusion to one of the names of God. God is called I am, the I am. Like, tell them I am sent you. And it feels like half a sentence in English, right? It feels like, you know, verb but no subject. But at the same time, like, that's such an interesting way to title this episode that is so concerned with naming. I even think back to Hippolyta naming the comet, you know?
Yeah.
And how she references that in this episode as like a moment when she experienced bigness before she began to shrink.
Yeah. I want the power of like that being the power of naming, but that like, and that being a really formative experience for her to name herself, that this is something that she in herness likes to do, is interested in, and it's about the bounds of space and time.
I like that this episode is an unfinished sentence, because I think that a lot of plot work was done in this episode, right? Like,
we find the time machine.
And now everybody's in on the magic secret. Like Hippolyta obviously is a wielder of magic or science that looks like magic. And now the only character that's out is Dee, who from the preview looks like is going to come in a big way coming up here soon.
Yep.
We also have Tick finding out about Montrose, of course. So
yeah, and we also haven't like touched a lot yet, but I guess like they've only been hinting, you know, Letty and most, I guess, being pregnant. Like they've been hinting at it at this point.
Maybe
So I guess we're just gonna wait and see when they confirm. You know, there's a bun in the oven. So
and George might come back.
George might come back.
If she doesn't bring him back, I'm gonna be real upset. But I really like that. Like it's Hippolyta's magic doing it. Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's no longer Christina who has all the power and is like dispensing it, you know, doling it out whenever it suits her.
Yeah. She's the spigot on the faucet of magic, and Hippolyta's a leak.
Yes. And Atticus is about fixing to become a leak himself when he gets his hand on that book of names.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're winding up our series, or not our series, our season, and a lot of like the groundwork that was laid in the early episodes is coming together. But yeah, so as much as there is plot work being done, definitive plot work being done this episode also has a lot of like unanswered questions, right? Like, who is a giant Afro Goddess? But I think that kind of is in line with the. But I think that's in line with kind of the shtick of the episode, in that indeterminacy is okay, and that the terms of possibility are also important, and that it's okay to have all the answers, and that it's okay to sit with the question of like what makes things possible.
Yeah, like the title again, I am period, right? Like it's not an unfinished sentence. The period reminds you the sentence is ended. You just don't know what it's saying.
It's got a subject and a verb.
I am.
All right. I think we should wrap up our episode here, but I really enjoyed our discussion. I really enjoyed Hippolyta this time.
This was Hippolyta's episode.
And it was a great
episode, and we have a Hippolyta episode.
Which are the two I was hoping we would get. So this is really great. Yeah.
Looking forward to what's to come. The teaser this week looked real intense. So we had a bit of a chill week this week. It looks like next week ain't gonna have no chill. So
yeah, the title next week is Jigabobo. So I'm assuming they're going to circle back to their references to Emmett Till. We'll see. That's it's a heavy possibility to tackle in a fictional TV show. So I'll be interested to see what they do with it.
Yeah. Well, if you guys enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us, because this really supports us and helps us grow our Lovecraft Country Bumpkin community.
And remember, study up on your theory of relativity before heading into creepy, crawly Lovecraft country.